Welcome to Indigenous Cryptid. I am your host, Aaron. Today we have two tales of a large creature you might know about. First up, we have our first anonymous storyteller telling a tale about Bigfoot in her backyard.
I'm trying to play it out in my head, remembering going back and remembering what I heard and saw and felt. We were riding, me and my cousin, and a friend of mine. We rode south part of the ranch. There's a fence that we have to go through, and then we ride into a canyon. There's sagebrush, there's juniper, there's cedar, there's pinyon, pine, there's wildlife, rabbits. Horses are used to that. We got to a point where the canyon splits, and we got off our horses to, take in the scenery. I noticed when I was going towards, my cousin was holding the horses, and I was walking back to the horses to get back on. And I noticed the horses were snorting, they were pawing at the ground, they were fixated on one area. Their ears were pointing in the direction of that location. I looked that way, and I didn't see anything at first, but we were standing there for a few minutes. I noticed the sun was kind of setting, so the light moved and it shined on a tree, but the reflection kind of got shinier as time went by, and that's when I noticed the back of Bigfoot. He had his back towards the sun setting. He was looking at us in the side direction. I remember his arms. His arms were huge. He went past his knees, and he was just as tall as the pinyon. So he blended in really good. And I could tell his muscle structure were like shadows and his chiselness, I guess you would say. You could tell where his muscles and his arms were, his back. There was bushes in front of him, but I could see his arm. I didn't see his hands, but I know his arms continued because his legs were a little further back. So he was kind of hunched over, but not too much. I didn't get the details of his face. I did take a picture. Back then, the phone that I had only had certain pixels where it starts to square off. So I tried to get a good picture, but it was still across the canyon. No sound, no smell, no yells or anything. It was just quiet. The only animals that were making noise were the horses. Then we got back on, rode out because it was getting dark. Got back to the corral. That's where we unsaddled and shared our story. That was the first time. The second time was about a few months later. I was at home. It was about 9:30. I got a call from my friend that lives up the mountain. He told me my calves were outside on the road, and that kind of made me wonder, are you sure it's ours? Because ours are always pinned up. I had 9 black calves for breakaway. So I was like, those are expensive. I don't want nobody just to grab them or whatever. So my dad, my little brother, my little sister, we drove back to the ranch. Drove along the road, the fence line, up until our fence line ends. There's a corner, and at that corner there's a little clearing. And I had the spotlight, and I was shining to the right, because I was sitting on the right side, passenger rear. And I went towards the rear end of the truck, a little up, and incline, there's a rock that split. and I was shining on that rock, and I noticed on top of it there was something yellow that was reflecting. So I kept it there. I don't know what I said, but it turned its head, and I could make out about 2 feet, maybe 1.5 distance, wide head. The eyes were about 3 inches apart, and the eyes were different. Eyes were wide on the outside and narrow on the inside. I thought it was an owl, reflection. The eyes, that distance, it was about maybe 100 yards, and that distance, an owl would look like it only had, both eyes would look like one. That's what I first thought, until it turned its head and I saw 2 eyes. Eyes were about 1.5 inches long, and it was kind of at a skyline. The skyline was in the back of it, so it was darker than the night sky. But I made out the head was kind of like cone shaped. I don't know what I said, but my brother turned around. My sister came across my body and pretty much squished me to see what I was looking at. And I kept the light on. It just stared at us, and we just stared at each other for about, I want to say maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I just told my dad, wait. He wanted to move up and turn around so we could get a better look, but it seemed like if I would take off the spotlight, then it would, I wouldn't see it again. And we have a powerful spotlight because we're always at the ranch. And I followed it. It started to move, and it was going parallel up the mountain. It wouldn't put its head down. It didn't take its eyes off of us. The 2 eyes just stayed parallel with the incline of the mountain. And then as it got higher, it went over the hill. It was walking on a little ledge, and it went over the side into the trees. About 2 weeks later, we drove to that same spot. I had my brother hike up to that spot, and he got a tree branch, and kept rising it. We had walkie-talkies, so I told him to stop when at the distance that I saw the eyes, and it was about 10 feet along that ridge. He walked just exactly what I saw he did, and he noticed there's a trail. He noticed the area where the Bigfoot went over the ledge, and I believe it's Bigfoot because of the distance, the height, and the structure of the head. And that was the second time. Third time I want to say encountered, but I didn't see him. I just really smelt him. And that was when we were deer hunting. We were deer hunting in pretty much in the same area. All these 3 stories are in the same area, just over the ledge and another canyon over, they're in the general area of our ranch. Again, south part of our ranch is the mesa, and we were hunting there. I was with my cousin, and we went to a spot where my dad told us to go, and we were returning, and there was a little rocky area. It's a rock slab. There's about a 50-foot drop on one side, and then there's like about 14-foot wall on the left side, or on one side, opposite side of the drop, the 100-foot drop or 50-foot drop. I don't know how long it is. It just kept going. And there's really tall trees. There's no tracks. You can't leave tracks because it's just rock. We went to a place where the rock fallen. I don't remember where my dad told me to go because that was the first time I've been there. And just below that area is where the canyon splits. So I took a wrong turn somewhere where my dad told me to go. And so we turned around and we started going back to where we would possibly meet up with my dad. While we were walking there, there's oak brush. If you know about nature, when a little breeze would make a lot of noise. So there was no breeze. It was evening. It was pretty calm, quiet. We were walking. We turned around. We started walking back towards that rock slab. And above us on the 14-foot little rock wall, there was something that kept making noise, just moving the little leaves on the oak. It's like an oak brush along that ledge. And there's like juniper trees that are like big bushes. They don't have a trunk that's visible. They're just right from the ground. The branches start. And it's pretty sandy, and it was about 10 feet wide that we were walking on that ledge. And as soon as I passed one of the juniper trees, I got a really strong scent of something I never smelled before. I've pretty much hunted since I could. I wouldn't say since I could walk, because I used to. Let's see, I've hunted pretty good part of my life. So I've smelled mountain lion, I've smelled bear, I know how they act in nature, and I know their scent, and mountain lion really do smell, but it was a different smell that I smelled. It was like you got about 1,000 stink bugs and just squished them all at once. At the same time, you have this urine smell and musky animal smell, and it made my ears like ring. It was so strong. I remember getting teary-eyed. I remember my nose burning, and I turned towards my cousin, and he was like, "What is that?" And it was already kind of dark. So I had a little flashlight, and I was walking, and it was going out. For some reason, it kind of really got dim. It was bright, and then it really got dim. And then we walked across the rock slab, and we met up with my dad. But I believe that's how Bigfoot smelled. I mean, I don't think he would take a shower or anything. But, yeah, I smelled him, seen him, and I haven't heard him. I haven't heard him yet. But I wouldn't mind.
That was our anonymous storyteller telling a story about Bigfoot in her backyard. Next up, we have another anonymous storyteller that mashes up two tales in one about Bigfoot as well.
So I have a story that I guess it manifested when I was in my early 20s. I was married previously, my first marriage, and this is along the Red Rock, New Mexico area, so it's between Gallup and Zuni, so I guess south of Gallup. And I was young, and I was a young mom, and I was in the house with grandma, and the little kids were playing outside, and it was just a regular day, and there was a man walking up the road with a backpack. And all the little kids start screaming and start running. And I kept thinking, what's going on? And they said, Audette, Richard, his name. Audette, Richard. And they were getting scared. And I was like, what's going on? Who's this? And I didn't know. And they said, my husband at the time said, it's an uncle, so don't worry about it. And they didn't say much, but everybody kind of got quiet. And he came in and he sat down. I guess this is his usual practice, so this is my first time meeting him. And he expected to be fed, so we had been cooking at the time, so I made him a plate and I gave it to him and I said, hi, and he looked at me. He says, who are you? And I introduced myself, and he says, my name's Richard. I said, okay. And so we all everybody was really quiet, and it was odd. And then he kept eating and stuff, and he looked at me and he says, I was raised by bears. It was just like weird. I'm like, okay, and I didn't really know what to think, so I was kind of thrown by the whole thing. I thought, okay, he's off, so let's just get through this meal and I'll be cool. And so I kind of trailed off into the living room, and then they were talking Navajo about different things, what he saw, what he was doing, and updating each other on their relatives and stuff. And then he ate, and then he put some food in his bag, apples, oranges, whatever he had was on the table. He put it in his bag, and he put his backpack back on, and he walked out. And then all the kids came out, but they were all hidden at that time. They had dove under the beds, behind the couches. I mean, they wouldn't come out for nothing. So he finally left, and I kept thinking, what is he talking about? And the grandpa was sitting there, and he spoke, English and stuff, and he was able to tell me that when he was about 3 years old, they were pinyon picking in the fall, and his mother, which was the sister, she had her little baby with her, the 3-year-old, and he had a certain birthmark, so she knew it was her, her kid. So that's going to come into play after this. So he got lost, and they couldn't find him. And they put out missing person. They had the police. I mean, this was massive. So Richard was probably in his 40s. So probably, I'm going to say had to be in the 60s. Some where grandmas were still wearing the skirts, and they're still pinyon picking, and they're still out there on horseback. And he disappeared, and they couldn't find him. And they searched and searched for him. And I remember them saying that the mom was so heartbroken that she didn't know what to think. There was no body. There was no trace. He was just gone. And so the grandpa that actually was there, he said, I was on horseback. So he said that he was out there about maybe 3-4 years later, and he seen something running in the trees. And he kept looking, and it was a little kid, but it was naked. And so he rode the horse up there, and he had to catch the child, because the child was like wild, like feral. So he picked him up on horseback, and he fought with him. And he was so dirty, but he was like, I think this is the nephew that we lost. So he couldn't tell, though, so he had to fight with this little kid, and he got him all the way home, back down the mountain. And they scrubbed him up in his backside. They were looking for the birthmark, because he had a big birthmark on his back, and it was him. So they called up the mother, and she was like, are you serious? And so they all came up, and all the elders in that area, they all came, and they found this little kid, and he was just grunting, and he was like unable, there was no more language, like he didn't have any development of language or anything. And so they had to have singing. So they were in the dark. They don't know where this kid was this whole time. So it took about a couple of years before the actual story starts to manifest. They had singings for him and everything. And finally he learned how to speak. They taught him how to speak Navajo first, and he eventually English. Then when he finally got his words together, then he started to tell the story. I was picked up, he says, by bears. And he didn't know all the animals they teach you in school. They don't teach you about Bigfoot. But he says that the bears had hands. They didn't have claws. They didn't have like nails, big nails, but they had hands. And they were really soft, he says, and they would throw me on their back. And we would travel across the mountains. And we lived in caves in different places, and he says they took care of me. And he says, but we never stayed in the same place. We traveled with the seasons. He would talk about how when it got cold, they went more south. And then when it got warmer, they came back up north. So he would pass by his homeland. He kind of knew where he was from. So he went to go explore because he had memory of the area. And so that's why he got lost. So he actually trailed away from his Bigfoot family. And Grandpa happened to see him. Crazy, huh? So I was like, this is not real, is it? And they're like, yeah. The whole family was like, yeah. That's why we let him be, because he had gone through such an experience that we don't even understand. But they said, well, how did they feed you? And he says he ate. I think he said that he learned to eat, whatever they had. So even his just learning the small time I spent with the family and hearing him speak, I realized that it has to be true, because he doesn't like to sleep inside. Still doesn't. That's why he's on the streets in Gallup, and he walks, and he always has a backpack. He has to move, and that's the way he's unsettled if he stays in one spot. It's unnatural for him. So this is the beginning of my belief system that there has to be something out there more. So in our community in Navajo, so we'll go on to the second story. When we moved to Navajo, New Mexico, I don't know if you've been through there, but there's some beautiful red rocks. They're like walls, and they're, hundreds of feet high, thousands of feet high. And it's a crossing. So if you want to follow the mountain chain, the rocks stop it, and you have to cross the highway, and then you end up in the Arizona side, and then you can go into Sawmill, climb the mountain, and then continue on the mountain chain. But the mountain seems to be broken up right between Navajo, New Mexico, and Sawmill, Arizona. And when we moved to Navajo on the that would be the east side of Fuzzy Mountain, I think we inadvertently put our home site in the walking path of Bigfoot. So I was remarried now, second husband, and I have an infant, actually Paisley, the one that's going to school here with me. I was nursing her, so she's 15, so it's just about maybe 14 and a half years ago. We had moved our mobile home in, and I was nursing her. And there was nothing, no furniture, no nothing, and we just came for the weekend just to start, plumbing and putting things in. We're just now setting up. So inside the house, the sun was going down. We had our dogs out and everything, and all of a sudden, you need to hear the birds are happening. Everything's really, happy in the summer. And all of a sudden, it went dead quiet when the sun was going down. It was like when it's blue outside, it's almost dark, and the dogs dove underneath the house. I've never seen them so scared in my life, and I'm like, what are they doing? And I was sitting in the room, and my husband's like, can you hear that? And we heard something huge moving. It didn't sound like a cow or a horse, but it was big, and it moved around the whole home site, and you could smell it. It was like the most pungent, sour, trashy, wet dog smell. I can probably try to describe it that way. And it was intense, but even the insects were quiet. And it seemed to be checking us out to see what we were, up to, whatever. And then it continued on, and it dropped down into the wash. We have a big arroyo next to the house, about maybe not even a quarter of a mile, and it went down, and then it was gone. And then after that, then all the insects started back up again, the crickets and everything else, and I'm like, what was that? And so that was the beginning of it. And so every year between the fair season, I don't know why the fair is a big September, it crosses, and you can hear it because he'll beat on the woods out there, and we're like, oh, he's coming through. And then also in May, you hear it on the other side, and so there's a transition area, and I think they're very nomadic, and I think they have cycles just like everything else in this world. So if you corroborate Richard's tale in contrast with what we have now experienced, the fact that a complete Navajo, New Mexico's alarm system goes off, and I kept thinking, is there a fire? And the locals say, no, that's for the locals to take their children inside because Bigfoot is probably around. So that's my story.
That was anonymous storytellers telling tales about Bigfoot. Thank you for listening to Indigenous Cryptid. We hope you have a good evening. What is your story?